welcome to the Murder, She Wrote Rewatch podcast. We're back with the last episode of Season 1. That is correct. It is Funeral at 50 Mile. And it is quite the interesting little episode. There is an actor in here that is in a number of episodes of Murder, She Wrote. However, the character he's playing in this episode is not the character that he plays in all of the other episodes, but we'll get into him in a minute. First off, we're going to take a look at, of course, all of the wonderful characters and actors that are in this episode. Our cavalcade of characters, list of suspects. Naturally, we have Angela Lansbury reprising her role, as she does in every episode, as Jessica Fletcher. We also have Mary Carver, played by Kathleen Beller. Now, Carver is the name of... there's a fellow, I can't remember his name now, which is really bad. We'll just call him Mr. Carver. But Mr. Carver is the one who is dead right at the very beginning, because it starts at a funeral. So we have Mary Carver, played by Kathleen Beller. Kathleen Beller is known for, let's see here, only 44 credits to her name. Last acting credit was in 2016. She is known for Girl in Senza Mama in The Godfather Part 2. She plays Alana in The Sword and the Sorcerer. I may have seen that movie. She plays Kirby Anders in Dynasty. And she plays Liz... What? Hold on. I need to actually, look at this, because that is a big name. That is a big name. She plays... Where is it? Kathleen Beller. Beller. It isn't listed here. Although Kevin Conroy is apparently in this one. Kevin Conroy, isn't that... Yeah, the voice of Batman. From the Batman. He was in this movie. Search for Tomorrow. Huh. Well, that's interesting. He plays Chase Kendall in this one. But that's not why... That's not why I came to look at this. Oh, it's a television series. Well, that makes more sense now, doesn't it? Yes, it does. So let's see. Kathleen Beller. Where are you? Where are you at? You're probably way down here. Probably not in many episodes. So let's do a little search here. Kathleen Beller. Okay. All right. Apparently, she played Liza Walton Caslow Sentinel Kendall, number 2. So apparently there was a second Liza Walton. Yeah, played by Meg Bennett in 4 episodes. And then she played it. Okay, that was weird. But Search for Tomorrow is... she is known for that. She is also been in nothing recent. like I said, her last acting credit was in 2016. She played Mother in a short film called Tom. And before that, it was in 1994. She did a voice in a video game called Siberia. Siberia. Doesn't say what her voice is. That sounds familiar, however. Let me just take a quick look at something. Because I'm going to go off on a tangent here. And we're going to go to the playlists. Because I want to check to see if it has been in here. And I think it may have been. Has it been in this one? What I'm doing is checking to see if they have played it on Watch and Play. Because I think they have. I remember seeing something about this. But I could have been wrong. Still. Anyways. Her last acting credit was, other than the 2016, was in 1994. That's a big gap. She played Mary Caitlin Callahan in the Bronx Zoo television series. Dynasty, The Blue and the Gray TV miniseries, Kathy Reynolds. But what we're interested in is Murder, She Wrote. And she played two characters in Murder, She Wrote. Mary Carver in this one, 1985. She played Maria something. Maria something. I can't pronounce that. In 1989, 4 years later. We also have Art Merrick, who is the husband-to-be of Mary Carver, played by Jeff Osterhag. Jeff Osterhag only has 30 acting credits to his name. He's not well known either. But he is known for Dragnet. Vic Daniels. He played Martin Clark in South of Reno. He played Tyrell Sackett in The Sacketts. And he played John Golden in The Legend of the Golden Gun. So he's been in some westerns, which is kind of fitting because this entire thing takes place in Wyoming. Has a very, very western feel to it. His last known acting credit, according to IMDb, is Taken by Force. He played Ty Nelson in 2010. And that movie seems to be a San Francisco detective goes hunting for the cruel Asian crime figure who killed his partner. He finds himself thrown into the center of a violent plot to steal a terrorist weapon. That was in 2010. I think he's the star, perhaps. Huh. Taken by Force. Well. Ain't that something? What else has he been in? Oh, apparently he does the voice of Balthazar, Valagar Korthala, and Draconis in Baldur's Gate 2, Throne of Baal. And he was in Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Amn as Valagar Korthala. He played Rick Massey in the movie Sex Crimes. At least I think that's a movie. Seems to be. Mask of the Red Death. He played Claudio. And I believe... Is that the one that has... No, I don't think that's the one. Because I know there was a Mask of the Red Death that had Robert Englund in it. I don't think that was it. What else? Oh, he was in Knight Rider as John Stanton in the episode Kit vs. Carr. He's been in a few things television-wise and a few movies here and there, but not too much. And he plays Art Merrick, as I said. Now we also have friends of the family. Starting off with the brother, Tim Carver, played by Donald Moffat. Now he is an actor who's been in a few things. 119 credits. He is most known for playing Gary in The Thing, Dr. Marcus Polk #1 in One Life to Live, the ABC television series. What do we got here? Clear and Present Danger. He played President Bennett. That's the Harrison Ford movie. And he played Chief Surgeon in The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I have never heard of that. He was in the 2000 television series Bull. Life of Stockbrokers is what that's about. Robert the Kaiser Roberts. So the guy's name is Robert Roberts. Okay. What else has he been in? He played Walt Whitman in an episode of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Little Dr. Quinn. Edgar Halcyon in 6 episodes of Tales of the City TV miniseries. He's been LA Law, the Bourne Identity TV miniseries. 1988, he played David Abbott, which I kind of want to check out now. The Bourne Identity miniseries. Yeah, starring Richard Chamberlain and Jocelyn Smith. Yeah, I do want to check out that miniseries. The Bourne Identity. What do we got? Murder, She Wrote. Tim Carver, the only episode he's been in. He was in Dallas. A whole bunch of television series stretching back to like the late 50s. Huh. He's been in a lot. I've seen him in some other things too that I've recognized over the years. Minor things, probably on television, TV movies and whatnot. Yeah, for sure. Donald Moffat. He's the brother of Mr. Carver, who is passed away. We also have, let's see, Doc Wallace. Doc Wallace, as played by Noah Beery Jr. Familiar, well-liked character actor of a very different persona than either his father, Noah Beery, or his uncle, Wallace Beery. He is best known for Joseph Rocky Rockford in The Rockford Files, Joey the Clown in Circus Boy, Buster McGee in Red River, and Buck Lipscomb in Sergeant York. Those are all old movies. He passed away in 1994 at the age of 81. His last acting credit was in 1986. Was on The Love Boat. Now, here's the thing. His last acting credit was in 1986. He has 171 acting credits. This man has done a lot of television. Murder, She Wrote was his only episode of Murder, She Wrote he did. 1985, naturally, because he passed away, stopped acting in 1986. And then, yeah. Huh. He played Edsel in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas in 1982. Sheriff Hawkins in The Capture of Grizzly Adams. He played Luther Dillard in the Yellow Rose television series. So I think a lot of westerns, because that definitely sounds like a western to me. Oh yeah, that's a western. There's a cowboy on the cover. Arthur Hanley in The Quest TV series. What is The Quest? Oh. Interesting. I've never heard of this before. The sovereign state of Glendora has a problem. It seems as though through an old agreement with France, unless there's a monarch, the country would revert to France. And the king has no heirs. So they found 4 Americans who are descendants of one of the former rulers. So they are sent out on a quest to show if they have the qualities necessary to be a ruler. Huh. It won't be easy because they go forth with no idea what to do, and their information is given to them through poems which they find hard to transcribe. Okay. That sounds bizarre, to say the least. Floyd Llewellyn in Magnum P.I., 1981. I have a feeling that Graham and Kathleen have already covered that episode. I seem to remember it over on the Magnum Rewatch podcast that they do. Oh yeah, he was Joseph Rocky Rockford in 121 episodes, which I think is the brother or possibly father of what's his face? Oh, I know his name. But I can't. James Garner. He might have been the father of James Garner's character, Mr. Rockford. Huh. Carl Pusser, Walking Tall Part 2. And he probably played in Walking Tall. No, he played Grandpa in Walking Tall. Interesting. Buffalo Baker in Hondo. Oh yeah, lots of old stuff. He did TV. Oh wow. He was doing TV and movies back in the 20s. In the 20s. Wow. So yeah, he's been around in Hollywood. Noah Beery Jr. We also have Sam Breen, sorry. The attorney Sam Breen, played by William Wyndham. Now, William Wyndham is a man who has been in Murder, She Wrote. I'm surprised he's not known for Murder, She Wrote, but he isn't. He is known for The Farmer's Daughter, as Congressman Glenn Morley. He's known as Mr. Gilmer, the prosecutor, in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's known as the President in Escape from the Planet of the Apes. And he's known as Mr. Hatfield in Uncle Buck. But that's not where I know him. His last acting credit was in 2006, of which he has 253 acting credits. Sadly passed away in 2012 at the age of 88. Star Trek New Voyages Phase 2 TV series. I've never even heard of this. In 2004. I'm sorry, what? How have I never heard of this? Scott, Dr. McCoy, Kirk. Yeah, Mr. Spock. Star Trek New Voyages Phase 2. The New Voyages of Starship Enterprise picking up from where the original 5-year mission left off. A new cast continues the adventures of this legendary crew to boldly go where no human has ever gone before to search for new life forms. Created by Gene Roddenberry. It's apparently official. I have never heard of this. How many episodes did they do? They only did one season. It looks like about 14 episodes, which is very strange, because Kirk's only in 13. Wow. It's a fan film? Since when do fan films get on here? Okay. Alright, fair enough. That caught me completely off guard. I'm like, Star Trek? But he played Commodore Decker in an episode of that. Very interesting. He has been in an episode of Ally McBeal, Boy Meets World, Judging Amy, Children of the Corn, The Gathering. He did the voice of Uncle Chuck in 25 episodes of Sonic the Hedgehog. He did the voice of Uncle Bob in Goof Troop. Frank Buckman in the Parenthood TV series. 12 episodes of that. Judge Hoffman in 3 episodes of Square One, the television series. Probably MathNet, the segment for MathNet, which is one of my all-time favorites. Captain James T. Lyle in an episode of Magnum P.I. What else has he done? Well, The Love Boat, Trapper John M.D., The Greatest American Hero, Henry Williams, he played an episode. The Tom Swift and Linda Craig Mystery Hour TV movie. Brothers and Sisters, he played Larry Crandall. He's been in a few things. Stretching all. Oh, he was in Mission Impossible as 4 different characters in 4 different episodes. He was a number of characters in the FBI TV series. We're going way back. First acting credit was in 1949. The Philco Goodyear Television Playhouse. He was Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet. Apparently they did Romeo and Juliet on the TV. Who knew? But what I am most concerned with is, of course, A Murder, She Wrote. Because that is where he has a lot of episodes. He was in 53 episodes of Murder, She Wrote. He was originally, in this episode, he's Attorney Sam Breen. However, the very same year that this came out, 1985. Now, given that this episode is the last one in Season 1, he showed up in Season 2. again as Dr. Seth Hazlitt, the coroner, medical examiner, what have you, in Cabot Cove, and friend of Jessica Fletcher. And he played Seth Hazlitt in 52 more episodes. From 1985 all the way to 1996. Which is amazing. I remember him specifically from a number of episodes that I used to watch back in the day. So I'm super excited to start in on the second season to be able to get to see him again. Because he has this very kind of grumpy, irascible type of personality to him that I really liked. We also have Bill Carmody, played by J.D. Cannon. He passed away in 2005. He was most known for playing Society Red in Cool Hand Luke, Peter B. Clifford, and something else in McCloud, the New York DA in Death Wish 2, and Captain Joe Burke in Raise the Titanic. He was in this episode as Bill Carmody of Murder, She Wrote, and he was in another episode in 1986 as Sheriff McCoy. Very interesting. Only about a year later, if that. Only 92 acting credits. His last acting credit was in 1991. He played Chet Burton in an episode of Law & Order, The Secret Sharers. He was Chief Clinton in The Highwayman, Call to Glory, General Hampton, Remington Steele. He was in a couple episodes of that. Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. He was in a few episodes of that. I remember Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. That was pretty cool. Peter B. Clifford, Chief Peter Clifford. Okay, Chief Peter B. Clifford. So it's the same character. 45 episodes of McCloud. That's what he was in. Alias Smith and Jones. Harry Briscoe. In 5 episodes of that. The TV series. A lot of television stuff he's been in. But then a lot of these actors are. Who else do we have? We also have Carl Meston, played by Clu Gallagher. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. Clu Gallagher. He's most known for playing Emmett Riker in The Virginian, Bert in The Return of the Living Dead, Billy the Kid in The Tall Man, and Mr. Walsh. Oh, yeah. Well, that's fortuitous and interesting. Mr. Walsh in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. I just covered A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 on big and small screens for Halloween. I remember Mr. Walsh. That is exactly who that is. That's pretty cool. His last acting credit, because he's still acting, was in 2016. He played Wayne in Blue Jay, whatever that is. He was Mo in Piranha 3 Double D. Lol. He apparently played the bartender in Feast, Feast 2 Sloppy Seconds, and Feast 3 The Happy Finish. I don't know if I want to know what that is. Alright, apparently Feast. Patrons locked inside a bar are forced to fight monsters. That is the entire synopsis of this movie. And apparently there's a Feast 2 that he also plays the bartender in. Sloppy Seconds. The monsters have made it into a small neighboring town in the middle of nowhere, and the locals have to band with the survivors of the bar slaughter to figure out how to survive. Okay. And then Feast 3, The Happy Finish. He also plays the bartender in. Survivors are saved by the mysterious prophet, Short Bus Gus, who seems to have the ability to control the beasts. He leads them into the sewers as they travel to the big city. Along the way, they get help from karate expert Jean-Claude Segal. Jean-Claude Segal. And learn that the beasts originate from a place called the Hive. Armed with this knowledge, they decide to fight back and destroy the beasts once for all. Jesus H. Christmas. That's horrible. Oh dear. What else has he been in? A lot of things I don't know. But he is in 3 episodes of Murder, She Wrote between 85 and 87. This one, he was in another one in 85 and then one in 87. All different characters, of course. North and South, Book 2, General Philip Harry Sheridan. He was in 5 episodes of that. Or 6 episodes, sorry. Knight Rider. Living Proof, the Hank Williams Jr. story. Quincy M.E. The Mackenzies of Paradise Cove. Played Cuda Weber. Very, very interesting. I still like that he was in Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 2. That's pretty cool. We also have, where is it? Sally Meston. Carl Meston's wife. Played by Stella Stevens. A native of Hot Coffee, Mississippi. I like the name of that town already. Hot Coffee. What's he been in? She been in. She was known for Linda Rogo in The Poseidon Adventure. Stella Purdy in The Nutty Professor. Hildy in The Ballad of Cable Hogue. I think that's how you pronounce that word. And Phyllis Blake in Santa Barbara. Last known acting credit was 2010 documentary short film Dante's Inferno, Abandon All Hope. She played Speaker, Eighth Circle, The Thieves. Megaconda, she played Mary Jane. That's got to be like an Anaconda ripoff movie. That is exactly what it is. Volcanic activity awakens a prehistoric giant anaconda. She played Doreen Crudup in Strip Mall TV series. Jake in General Hospital for 7 episodes. Susie Dupree in Nash Bridges. Mrs. Morton in Silk Stockings. Mrs. Herbert Pringle in Invisible Mom. Body Chemistry 4, Full Exposure. She played Fran Sibley. Body Chemistry 4. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's one of those movies. That's one of the softcore thriller porn movies that were so prevalent back in the 90s. Phantasmagoria video game. She played Luann in that one. I own that game. Haven't played it yet, but I own it. Attack of the 5'2" Woman. Lawanda. Point of Seduction, Body Chemistry 3, Franny Sibley. Okay, so she's reprising her role from previous films. I bet there's a Body Chemistry 2 in here. Somewhere. Somewhere. Santa Barbara, Adventures Beyond Belief. Tales from the Hollywood Hills. Loretta Lawley Zachary Vanderpost in an episode of Magnum P.I. What a name. This is the only episode she's been in Murder, She Wrote. Okay. And a whole bunch of other TV movies. And such. Alright, I think... Oh, wait, no. Last but not least, Sheriff Ed Potts, played by Cliff Potts. He is most known for playing John Keenan in Silent Running, Bob Dalton in The Last Ride of the Dalton Gang, Andy Stamper in Sometimes a Great Notion, and Larry Retzliff in A Case of Rape. Huh. Seen in more homes than any made-for-TV movie in television history. I've never heard of this. But this is a bit before my time, too. 1974. Huh. 68 acting credits to his name. He has been in... His last was The Ravine, a short movie in 2016. Ugh, pardon me. He played Charles. Star Trek The Next Generation, Admiral Kennelly is the character he played in the episode Ensign Rowe. He played Sheriff Ed Potts in this episode, 1985, and then a second episode in 1990. He played Ralph Maddox in Murder, She Wrote. He was 3 different characters in the television series Hotel, which I think I've seen. Maybe. I may have seen that, yeah. For Love and Honor, First Sergeant Eugene Allard. Played 12 episodes of that. Simon and Simon. He played in an episode of that. He played Jake Lawton in an episode of Starman, the TV series. Gar Manning in an episode of MacGyver. Bose Harper in 4 episodes of Dallas. Under Crystal Lake, he played Swan. Under Crystal Lake. Huh. Action-based thriller tells the story of a small California farming community caught up in the bloody grip of big city crime and corruption. Interesting. I thought it'd be something about Jason. Brett Maverick, the TV series, which I believe, yep, James Garner. Dr. Marcus Welby, MD. He played Dr. Paul Moran. And Dr. Phil Walton. The Name of the Game, played Andy Hill. But that is about it for the cast of characters that we have. We got Mary Carver, Art Merrick, Tim Carver, Bill Carmody, Sam Breen, Sally Meston, Carl Meston, Doc Wallace, and Sheriff Potts. So what is this particular episode all about? Well, it starts off with our title screen showing some hills and mountains. It does a couple cuts of a pickup truck driving along past the sign for 50 Mile, Wyoming, population 427 people, before we start to hear a voiceover of the priest at a funeral for Mr. Carver. And the priest is saying that the Mr. Carver is survived by his daughter, Mary, and her husband-to-be, Art Merrick, as well as his brother, Tim Carver, and his good friends, Doc Wallace, Sam Breen, and Bill Carmody. And we also see Jessica Fletcher there at the funeral as well, because Jessica is a friend of the family. And just as they're about to inter him into the ground, an RV pulls up outside the funeral, and Carl Meston and his wife arrive. Carl wearing a cowboy suit and looking a little bit tacky and sleazy for coming late. And his wife is looking very very gaudy. There's a gun salute for him. They fold up the American flag over his coffin. The sheriff is there as well, in uniform. It's a very somber moment for the most part. Doc Wallace takes the flag and brings it over to Mary. It's a very touching moment because, you know, someone's passed away. We see Bill Carmody heading over, having a few words with Carl Meston, and Carl kind of jokes that because Bill Carmody's carrying his rifle because he was part of the salute, because him and Sam Breen and Doc Wallace, they're all wearing army hats from service. And Mr. Meston is all like, "You're not going to use that rifle on me." And Bill's like, "Wouldn't do much good. It's loaded with blanks." And of course, Mr. Meston tries to pass it off as being, "Oh, he's just got a weird sense of humor." Everybody is slowly leaving the funeral area. Miss Mary Carver, the daughter, is definitely distraught. She's lost her father. There's some touching words between her and Jessica, and everybody then goes off to the Carver Ranch, where there's a bit of a storm blowing in. Doc Wallace, of course, pours Jessica a drink. They trade a few words, and of course, the good Doc basically says, you know, he's the only doctor in like 200 miles, so please call me Doc. And she's like, "Well, that's fine. You just call me Jessica." And they kind of go on their way. Mr. Carver, Tim, the brother, is looking out at the storm blowing in. You can hear a bit of a rumble of thunder and whatnot, some lightning flashing as the storm's kicking up. Jessica asks Doc Wallace about the sheriff because he's got his gun holster on and his uniform at the place. And the Doc basically says, if you want him to be your friend, he's like, you best call him Marshall. So, of course, the sheriff comes over, uh, talking to Jessica, and Jessica basically works that right into her conversation, calling him Marshall and whatnot. And the sheriff basically says that he read one of her books. It wasn't as good as another author's name, and he drops a famous author's name. Um, and of course, Jessica's like, well, we're all under his shadow. Um, and of course, he's basically all like, I don't have much use for mysteries. And he's a policeman. And she asks about his gun holster because she seems to have it set up to he seems to have it set up to quick draw, and he definitely does. He seems a bit of a blowhard, a bit of a buffoon, the way he is portrayed in this. Next thing we see is Mary talking to Tim along with Sam about the what's going to happen to the ranch now that Mr. Carver's dead, because Tim expects there to have been a last will and testament filed, because him and his brother had discussed merging the ranches once again like it used to be. And according to Sam, the attorney, despite his urging to his good friend, he never filed a last will and testament with anyone. Which means it goes to the heir, which would be Mary. So already there's a little bit of conflict going on. Something could be brewing in the background for that. Next thing we see is an RV pull up outside, and Mr. Meston and whatnot coming in, and of course Mary basically doesn't want him around at all, despite the fact that Meston seems extremely convinced that he owns the property and the house and everything, because he's got Mr. Carver's last will and testament in his pocket. Of course, Sam Breen has to look at it because he's an attorney. And things get a little heated because he's talking to Art, the husband-to-be of Mary, and basically saying that basically implying that the only reason he was interested in Mary was to get a hold of the land and the money and the cattle and everything, which Mr. Merrick takes extreme dim view of that particular statement. So there's a little bit of a scuffle. Mary, of course, is worried and distraught now because all this is happening on the day of her father's funeral. I mean, it's very, very tactless of the man. Mrs. Fletcher then goes in and has a bit of a word with Mr. Merrick, asking, talking to him about how he knows Mr. Carver and whatnot, and he intimates that he saved Mr. Carver's life in the war, which is why the man owes him. And of course, Jessica's like, "Oh, in the war? Well, you must know my husband then. He was Mr. Carver's superior officer." And Jessica gives Mr. Merrick an incorrect first name of her husband. And the man just blindly agrees with it, letting Jessica know that he doesn't know anything of the sort. He wasn't in the war at all. Which is quite clever of her. I didn't catch it immediately because it's been quite a while since her husband was mentioned by name. Meanwhile, that storm is that storm is coming in, and everybody's starting to get ready to go out and batten down the hatches, so to speak. When Jessica hears Mr. and Mrs. Merrick having a drink in the bar, kind of arguing a little bit with each other, to the point where Mrs. Merrick challenges him to an arm wrestling contest for $500 and goads him into it by saying, are you a coward or are you just chicken, so to speak? And they go and arm wrestle, and she whoops his ass handily. So he's got to pay her $500, which he does, and then to help cover up the fact that he's a little embarrassed, he goes and he leaves the bar and offers to help batten down the hatches, which they accept because big storm coming in. So every man will help. So out they go into the yard to batten down the hatches and whatnot. And we see different people leading horses into the barn, bringing feed in from outside. We see Mr. Merrick closing the barn door and climbing up to the loft to close another door up there. Which is an interesting point, because there's been no mention of him actually knowing the knowing this area at all that well. The next morning, it cuts to, and we see Art coming in, having gotten a drive back in with one of the ranch hands, a man by the name of Jesus. And I don't know if this is something that... I don't know if this is something that just was the time or whatnot, but the character's name of Jesus is actually spelled Hay hyphen SOOS. So it's literally Jesus or Seuss. And I don't think that's how that's supposed to be spelled. But regardless, everybody's having breakfast at the table when Mr. Merrick comes in. And, of course, he says that he got his truck stuck in a mud hole out there and tried to dig it out, but it was no going. So he started walking, and Jesus came along to give him a ride home for the last mile or so. Jesus, of course, heads to the barn to open things up and finds Mr. Merrick hanging from a rafter, having been strung up. Oh dear. So we've got two murders. One, of course, being the man who is troublesome. The sheriff, of course, arrives, heading in and whatnot, and the sheriff's first question is, why is he still hanging up? No one's cut him down. Jessica, of course, is like, well, that was my fault, Sheriff. I figured you'd want to have a look at the scene of the crime as it was. And he's just like, yeah, well, I seen it. So let's get him down. Jessica then goes over to Doc Wallace and asks him if there's been any murders and how much the sheriff has experience. And he says, well, there ain't been a murder in this county since in like 5 years or so, and the sheriff's only been sheriff for 3. At which point, Jessica starts talking to the sheriff and basically pointing out all of the clues that she's noticed. That there was splintering on the beam, which means that his weight was hauled up after he was dead, and that there was evidence to try and move a bale of hay over, but then they gave it up. And there was a blow to the back of his head, which may have very well killed him first. But the way she's pointing it all out and making suggestions to the sheriff about what he should do has basically been like, this is all something that you obviously have seen, Sheriff, so as not to make it seem like he's incompetent. The good old Doc Wallace kind of takes a little bit of a check at Jessica's suggestion, and he is giving a rough estimate time of death 4 or 5 hours ago, so about 3 in the morning, before everyone is escorted out. Jessica is asking Mary about her father, and if there's anything that her father any secrets he might be keeping. And she doesn't seem to think so at all. But she does explain that Mr. Meston did go and see her father at the hospital a few days before he died, and then afterwards her father was never the same and just kind of deteriorated from there. Because the witness signatures on the will that Mr. Meston has are both nurses. But Jessica has her doubts that she thinks that will was coerced into being signed. That there was some possible blackmail going on. Mr. Carmody comes out, has a couple words with Mary and Jessica. Although Mr. Carmody definitely did do some business with Mr. Meston in the past, but he states that the only reason he did was because he didn't have much of a choice in the matter, kind of lending credence to the fact that Mr. Meston may have blackmailed Mr. Carver into signing that will. And the sheriff is in there wanting to talk to everybody. And of course Jessica once again kind of helps him out by suggesting that, because he's like, now, where were we? And she's like, that's a very good point, Sheriff. I mean, where were we indeed at the time of the murder? Good question. It's wonderfully obvious, but at the same time kind of subtle. I like her portrayal of that. But they get everybody there, and you've got Tim Carver, the brother, was helping to get things locked up, along with Bill Carmody. Sam Breen was pulling in feed into the place. Doc Wallace, I think, was helping to helping to bring in some stuff from another part of the time. But basically, the four men are kind of giving each other alibis because they all saw each other at the time of the murder. However, Jessica and Mary and Mrs. Meston, the newly widowed, none of them have concrete alibis for this. Which is kind of interesting. That kind of made me suspect Sally Meston there, because she's pretty strong with the beating him in an arm wrestling match. So there's some more questioning that goes on as the sheriff's kind of at a bit of a loss. But he seems to be suspecting Art Merrick. They end up eventually getting Art's truck pulled out of the mud hole that he got stuck in. And as soon as that happens, the sheriff comes by. Basically planning on arresting Mr. Merrick, because he has a look at the mud hole and he's like, there's good solid ground on both sides of this. You could have drove around it. And he's like, Art tries to explain, I didn't see it until I was already in it, Sheriff. But the sheriff isn't really having much of that, so he pulls out his bracelets and arrests Mr. Merrick on suspicion of murder. We see Jessica and Mary heading into the sheriff's office to talk to him. Mr. Bream is already there, trying to get Mr. Merrick out. And Jessica is, of course, coming to Art Merrick's defense, laying out her logic for why she thinks that Art couldn't have done it. Of course, the sheriff is a little upset, a little angry, because this is a stressful situation for him. He's never had to deal with an flat out murder. And Jessica poses a different solution, a different suggestion. Of course, Mr. Bream and the sheriff, they let Art go because there's not a lot of, not a whole lot of evidence to things. Jessica then pays a visit to Doc Wallace. Or rather, the coroner, to see if there's any evidence on the body. And she ends up finding out that the man who was killed, Mr. Meston, was caught snooping around in Doc Wallace's files previously. Which is kind of interesting. I mean, what could that portend? Back at the ranch. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. It's been a while since I've said that. They head on in. Mary is getting a little bit upset that the upset that Sally Meston is hanging around thinking she's going to own the place. And we find out from the maid that Mrs. Meston's been making a lot of long-distance phone calls. Next thing we see is the sheriff coming by. Art Merrick is released, and this is where Jessica suggests to the sheriff that he go in and offer to challenge Mrs. Meston to an arm wrestling contest. And the sheriff does so. And of course, Mrs. Meston is all for that. She's a very competitive woman. So she goes and takes off her jewelry like she did the day before. And they go and arm wrestle. And of course, Jessica's nearby watching. And she notices something. Mrs. Meston, of course, beats the sheriff. And that's when the sheriff is like, you know, that might be something to your theory, Miss Fletcher. I mean, she is pretty strong. She could have strung him up. Which has her going a little bit... she's a little bit frustrated and angry that she's been cornered into this, and that now she's a suspect in the murder. And of course, Jessica's like, well, why don't you... There is a way for you out of this, you know. The sheriff, of course, is a little bit amused. He's like, it's a pity, I think she liked me. We see Jessica in her room, sleeping, and there seems to be a knocking at the window. So she gets up and heads to the curtains, pulls up the shade, only to see a noose hanging outside her window. And she says to herself, I do believe I'm making someone nervous. Which is a nice little moment for Jessica. But that's about when she has a good idea. It's breakfast the next morning then, and Mrs. Meston comes in. Very cocky and very confident. She sidles up to Art, and which pisses Mary right off. She storms off. And the sheriff comes in. Basically at the point where he's back at square one. Because he wants to, he's planning on arresting Mrs. Merrick at this point. And Jessica speaks up and is like, well, why don't you play your trump card? It's like, you can get out of this now. And that's when she lays out the fact that Mrs. Merrick isn't actually married to Mr. Merrick, the dead man. Because the wedding band that she's wearing hasn't left a white band on her finger from her wearing it long. But her bracelets that she took off did. So she hasn't been wearing it long. And the long distance call she was making was to find a chapel willing to forge a marriage certificate. So she can get out of this because if she's not married to Mr. Merrick, she has no motive for killing him. Which is very, very clever of Jessica. I quite liked that little bit. Which puts, of course, the sheriff back at the beginning because he's got no suspect anymore. But Jessica thinks she knows who the killer might be. She has an idea. She has a very good idea of the description. And she says that that the murder has to be a tall, strong, ambidextrous man. Has to be that. Because the noose that was used to hang him was done up by a left-handed man. But the noose hung outside her window was done by a right-handed man because of the way it was tied. Which is kind of clever. Jessica, of course, goes and talks to Doc Wallace then. And she sees that Doc Wallace is left-handed. And at this point, I'm like, so Doc Wallace killed him? Because it's getting close to the end, and Jessica's doing her thing. And she invites Doc Wallace out to the barn. And of course, Doc Wallace follows, kind of talking to Jessica, trying to dissuade her of some things. And this is where I'm going to put a little bit of a warning up here. Not for spoilers or anything like that, but it's about to get into some serious talk about touchy subjects. So if there is anybody out there that doesn't like to hear about the sort of how to put this, we'll just go right out and say it. If anybody does not like the subject of rape, feel free to not listen to the rest of this episode. All right. So they go into the barn, and Tim Carver's there, as is Sam Breen and Mr. Bill Carmody. They're all there. And Jessica lays it out that all four of them killed Mr. Meston. Because between all four of them, they make up a tall, strong, ambidextrous man. And she also lays out the fact that they all alibied each other, which makes it good for them. And the reason why is because of, but she's not sure of the motive, and that's what she gets out of them. And the motive is the fact that years ago, in the past, Mr. Meston ended up raping Mary's mother. And Mr. Meston found out when he accessed Doc Wallace's files that Mary's father was sterile, couldn't father children, which means Mr. Meston is Mary's father. and her mother died years and years ago. Shortly after Mary was born, couldn't handle the abuse and the strain, and they'd strung him up back then after they found out what he'd done to Mary's mother. But Mary's father, Mr. Carver, didn't want to kill him. Talked the others out of killing him and taking him down. And he stayed around the area after he was released, but he just kind of laid low and whatnot until came back here, and they were in the barn and whatnot, and the horse came in to the barn by itself, and they kind of took it as providence, and so they strung him up again. And it was only going to be, we're just going to, I guess, scare him again. But while he was sitting on the horse with the noose around his neck, there was a big flash of lightning, and the horse took off, and he dropped and broke his neck. So they kind of took him down, and the doc gave him a blow behind the head to make it look like he was dead before he was hung, and then they strung him back up again. And they lay all this out for Jessica, that this is what he did, and he blackmailed Mr. Carver because nobody wanted Mr. Carver Mr. Carver didn't want Mary to know that he wasn't her father. It was the whole reveal of the murder and who did it. It hits a very unsatisfying note. The way it's all portrayed and everything that happens. Because of the circumstances behind it, there is no happy ending here. There's no real closure at all, because Mary still doesn't know, and I don't think anybody's going to tell her. It's a very down and dark ending for this particular thing. And Sam, the lawyer, says that they'll go talk to the sheriff. They'll turn themselves in. They'll get a trial by jury. However that shakes out, they'll accept it. But nobody's going to tell Mary about the truth about who her father is. And Jessica agrees that she won't learn it from her either. And as they're all walking out of the barn, that's where the credits roll. And it hits a very kind of a down note in a way, which is kind of not often the case in a lot of shows. And I felt it was a very interesting way to end season 1. Usually a season tends to end on a more positive note. I mean, you can only get so positive because you're dealing with a show that's all about people dying. But for it to end like this, definitely very interesting. I like what they've been doing so far. So that's going to be it for this episode of the Murder, She Wrote Rewatch podcast. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you like what I'm doing, please give that like button a tap, and give that subscribe button a tap as well if you haven't already, so you can be kept apprised of when I do new videos, and throw a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think so far, if you've been keeping along. I hope you have been. I hope those that have been watching have been enjoying what I've been doing. I'm glad for everybody that watches and enjoys. Please leave some comments in the comment section too. I love to get discussions going with people. So do all that, and a little note, I'm going to be taking a couple weeks break from doing the Murder, She Wrote Rewatch podcast, because we've hit a good a good break point for me to take a bit of a break from it, because it is the last episode of the season. But they will be coming back sooner than you think. So do all that good stuff. And until next time, my friends, join me next time for more Jessica Fletcher solving crimes, for more interesting fun, for Dr. Seth Hazlitt, who's coming up soon. And join me for more murder.